Whom the Gods Fear, by J. Wdowski. Chapter 1. To do all that one is able to do is to be a man. To do all that one would like to do is to be a god. Napoleon Bonaparte. Swirling in his large black leather chair, Glen Yeager surveyed the city below him. His remotely controlled tinted windows formed the southern wall of his spacious office. It gave him a spectacular view of Manhattan Island. He could clearly see Freedom Tower too, along with most of everything south of Midtown. At all levels the city was at its usual bustling pace. Speeding megrails, private skycars, and municipal jump jets from ambulances to patrol vehicles all whizzed below him. Glen could even mentally visualize the hidden activity of the subrail system that never stopped and reached all corners of the greater metropolitan area. He loved these brief moments of calm in his day. Stretching out his arms, he folded them behind his head and leaned back in his desk chair. Dreaming skyward, he looked up at blue skies and soft white clouds slowly floating over the city. He suddenly noticed flashes of light behind one of the white clouds. Breaking through the cloud, a space shuttle was making its descent from orbit. He watched serenely as the craft used several controlled blasts to gently lower itself from the heavens. The craft became larger and larger as it made its approach to the spaceport on the other side of the Hudson. It was a freight shuttle followed by two more freight shuttles and a single smaller passenger craft. He was able to clearly make out the logo of the Yeager Corporation on the shuttle's stabilizing fins. Glen held back his impulse to scream out in triumph. Instead, he grinned and settled for a barely audible "yeah" as he made a fist and a slight jab motion. He could only think of the years it had taken him to achieve this moment. Years of negotiations, dealing with endless regulations, financing, and construction schedules. He relished in his success. For over a month, he had waited, not much unlike the old European investors in the age of exploration waited for the ships they financed to return with the silks and spices of the Far East. Many a ship were lost to pirates and storms at sea, but if their ships with their priceless cargoes did return to their home ports, their investors would be bathed in riches. Only 5 days behind schedule, Glen's ship had literally come in. As Glen watched the 3 shuttles touch down at the Meadowlands spaceport and his completion of the first in history interstellar trade deal, he considered allowing himself to get caught and finally start his own line of descendants. Most of his contemporaries were already on their second or even third marriages. A few of them were already grandparents. Glen was just shy of middle age. He still had plenty of time to have a family of his own. Glen's moment of blissful feelings of success were abruptly interrupted by his office computer announcing the arrival of Mr. Landru. "Enter." Glen responded. The large oak and brass double doors of his office opened in response. Landru marched in with 2 of his assistants following close behind him. One was a human, the other was a gentleman's android. Instinctively, the men and the android sat in their appropriate seats on the opposite side of Glen's large cherry wood desk. Landru sat front and center. His almond-shaped eyes were cool and professional without a hint of emotion. Landru was American, of French, Han Chinese, and Vietnamese descent. He was 9 years younger than Glen. Unlike Glen, he had always been the top of his class. He knew how to take exams and was extremely detailed-oriented with picture-perfect memory. Many people found Marcus Landru so cold and computer-like that they felt intimidated to be around him. His gentleman android was considered by many as much more charismatic and friendly. Glen, though, appreciated Landru's level-headed professionalism and his attention to the smallest details. He trusted Landru completely. Landru would always give him the unvarnished facts, even if they were unpleasant to hear. Unlike Landru's university professors, Glen was not looking to get his ego stroked. Someone had once said about Glen Yeager, "Yeager is the only person I know who can take an insult, but didn't trust a compliment." Landru never fed Glen what he wanted to hear. He told him the facts as he knew them, good or bad. Glen always felt the most important thing a man of enterprise could have around him was skilled, devoted, and brutally honest people. Especially individuals that were skilled in areas Glen was actually weak in, attention to details for one. Landru's greatest attribute, though, and Glen's greatest weakness, was his patience in filling out bureaucratic forms and dealing with any sort of government office. This alone made Landru priceless to Glen. Landru did his job extremely well. Glen voice activated the room's recorders and gave his full attention to Landru. Landru responded by activating his forearm comm. Sir, we have a problem. How many times have I asked you not to call me sir? You make me sound like I am a generation older than you. Glen replied, Customs? Hasn't the state milked me enough already? As much as Glen had trained himself to work and deal with government bureaucrats, knowing that losing one's temper with them only causes them to flex their authority even more so, he still had trouble tolerating dealing with government officials to the point of it almost being a phobia. One of Glen's favorite quotes was from Dr. Samuel Huntington, author of The Third Wave and Clash of Civilizations. The only thing worse than a society with a rigid, over-centralized, dishonest bureaucracy was a rigid, over-centralized, honest bureaucracy. The world's new government was clearly the latter, making accomplishing many things extremely difficult, in spite of the guaranteed 12th right of the EGG's constitution. All in the name of protecting and ensuring the quality of life for the general public, government bureaucrats were always trying to micromanage people's lives. Glen thought the general public had all too willingly surrendered their human souls in exchange for the illusion of a world without risks and everything magically provided for them. Too much of humanity, he thought, lived a life no different than animals in a petting zoo, minus the children to admire them for their docile cuteness. No, sir, Landru ignored Glen's request. I handled all government shipping requirements before we even launched the venture, as you know. No, the problem is much more complexing than any government office. Confused, Glen ignored the fact Landru called him sir again. What could be more complexing than government bureaucrats? Landru transferred his data from his forearm comm to Glen's. On the log report of the venture was displayed on the unraveled nanotech paper like computer screen. He read the ship's report on its journey from Xing 4. The ship was now in a synchronous orbit above New York City. I do not understand this. This is impossible. I am afraid so. Sir, the venture has returned empty. I received the Interstellar communique from Demi 9 days ago that they successfully left Xing 4's orbit with full cargo bays. Glen rose from his chair in an uncommon burst of rage. I want Demi in my office as soon as he is cleared from Deccan. Sir, you do not understand. The ship is empty of cargo and of crew. Glen fell back into his chair. What do you mean? The venture was set on autopilot to return to Earth. The computers brought her into orbit. Captain Demi and his crew are nowhere to be found on board. The diamonds. The captain's safe was empty. Glen sank deeper into his seat, his mouth left slightly open in silent disbelief. Landru remained his signature emotionless calm, attentively waiting for further directions from his employer. Landru's one human aide, having listened to the conversation, began to nervously fidget in his seat as he realized his career was now in great jeopardy. The long silence was interrupted by Glen's personal forearm comm charming. Incoming calls on teleconference lines. Line 1, the president of Wells Fargo. Line 2, the president of Chase Manhattan. And line 3, the vice president of Singapore Trust. He thought to himself, bad news travels fast. Glen leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. I'm ruined.